hear that, they feel it, but they don't know exactly how it's rigged. I wanted to go to where people didn't really know me, my books. I wanted to go to places where I could actually interact. I didn't expect to sell many books, but I did hope to learn something. Hi, Eva. Nice to see you.
Great to finally meet
How are you?
And look who we found.
Good morning. Welcome to Kansas City.
Well, Reverend, thank you. Hi, Claudia. You're chair of the board.
I am a part of this work because of my family and my community. My youngest son, Paul, married and has 4 little children, has worked all of his life. But unlike when I started to work as a young person, he seems to find jobs that don't have livable wage. They're not full-time jobs. He works 60 hours plus a week to take care of his wife and 4 kids and still struggles a lot, even to the point that he's had to move back in my house with his family of 6 at one point, because they continue to struggle. His wife has like $100,000 in debt in student loans. She has a master's degree. She has no job. It is not an uncommon story in our community.
Unfortunately, Claudia, I'm hearing it all the time, and it's a story that affects.
A lot of these things that we're talking about, all a spin-off. An economy that has been immoral from its inception, designed to include everyone in a fair way in the sense of access. How do you reform something that's immoral at its core?
Inherent in an economic system that makes it either immoral or moral, or good or bad. It depends on how it's organized. And if it's organized for people, that's a good and moral system. Our American economic system, capitalism, is a system based on private property and a free exchange of goods and services.
One of America's greatest strengths is our free market.
Let the free market system decide.
We all believe in the free markets. That's what our capitalist system is about.
The law of supply and demand, operating unimpeded by government.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Few ideas have more profoundly poisoned the minds of so many as the notion of a free market existing somewhere in the universe into which the government intrudes. There's no such thing as a free market without government making the rules of the game. What kind of rules? Rules governing property, monopoly, contracts, bankruptcy, and enforcement. Let's take property. Until the 1860s, human beings were lawful property in the United States. It took years of activism and a civil war, but Americans finally made slavery illegal. Or take bankruptcy. If you're big business, you can declare bankruptcy over and over again to protect your assets. But if you're a student, you can't reorganize your debt in bankruptcy. Or if you're a homeowner who's underwater because the entire market has collapsed, you can't use bankruptcy. It's illegal. These rules don't come from nature. They reflect the interests of those with the most power, which means they change over time.
In the name of all those who do the work, pay the taxes, raise the kids, and play by the rules. In the name of the hard-working Americans who make up our forgotten middle class, I proudly accept your nomination for President of the United States.
Just about 50 years ago, I met Bill Clinton. I had already met Hillary Rodham. She was an undergraduate at Wellesley. I had been president of my class at Dartmouth. We were both involved in student government. So I knew her, and I knew Bill, and even the first day of Yale Law School, I was sitting there in the cafeteria talking to Bill Clinton, and Hillary came up and she said, "Bob, how are you?" And I said, "Great, Hillary. I want to introduce to you my friend from Oxford. We were just at Oxford together, Bill Clinton." And she said, "Hi, Bill." And he said, "Hi, Hillary." And then 25 years ago, Bill Clinton called me. He wanted me to be his Secretary of Labor, and I was excited because maybe we could actually make some real progress. You had this pent-up demand in the country for something that is very, very different, that has a different vision. We wanted to create the possibilities for people who were not really yet participating in the economy. Because it was building the future of the country. It was building the capacity of the country to not only grow, but to bring everybody along in that growth. We were young. We were the new generation. We were the boomers. I was going to go down and try to help him figure out what to do about the economy.
In focus this evening, the shrinkage in America's middle class. Even though the economy is now growing, many of the jobs it is creating pay poverty wages.
President Clinton has been promising wages would rise. But at the Labor Department, Secretary Robert Reich sees the number of working poor growing.
More and more of the nation's income and wealth were going to the top. People in the middle class was under greater and greater stress. The poor were not doing well at all. I thought we could actually reverse that direction. I spent a lot of time all over America, and what I got back from people was a lot of the skepticism and cynicism and the beginnings of the anger that has really emerged full force in 2016. It was just beginning then.
The pleasure to introduce Secretary Reich to the Show Me State and to Mid-Missouri. Thank you for being here today.
As Tim said, this started out as a book tour, and I've done a lot of books, and I've written a lot of books, and I've tried to help people understand what's really going on. I don't want to just go out to bookstores. I really want to talk to people about their lives. Yes, that's true.
Name's Darvin Bentley, and I'm a farmer. And there's other names they use for me, but I just mainly go by farmer and cattleman. Family farm has been around for 80 years. You're kind of raised into it. I jumped on the first tractor when I was 10 years old. I could barely reach the pedals. It's a lot of hard work, but our margin of profits are way down, Farm income this year has been predicted to drop 50%. Well, excuse me, nothing I buy has dropped 50%. I don't think anything in the grocery stores dropped 50%. The son would kind of like to come back on the farm.
There's nothing that I would want more than to sell my home and move down here. And
the physical part of it's pretty rough.
What kind of profit margins are you pulling in a year?
Oh, the profit margins, varies. But the total deal, I make around. The year before was like $320,000.
You spent
300.
300. So, in my mind, your profit margin would have been 20,000. Correct?
Yeah.
There is a vicious cycle that has set in. The American economy today is almost twice as large as it was in 1980, but the median wage has gone nowhere. In fact, if anything, most Americans' wages adjusted for inflation have declined. So where did all the money go? It went upward. In 2014, corporate profits before taxes reached their highest share of the total economy in at least 85 years. Meanwhile, the percentage of the economy going to people's wages has dropped dramatically. Hidden inside the rules of the market, money flows upward, out of the pockets of average Americans, and into the profits of major industries, executives, and shareholders. The vicious cycle is that as income and wealth go to the top, so does political power. And here's where it gets interesting, because as political power goes to the top has more and more ability to influence the rules of the game.
By its staff that would put tight new restrictions on television commercials that are aimed at children.
Advertisers are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting the consumer groups and the FTC staff proposals. The makers of sugared cereals, candy, and toys are fighting back.
You would have thought we had declared World War III because the business community was so upset. I began to see businesses and business begin to get more and more power in Washington, more and more power over the legislative process. They closed down the Federal Trade Commission because of that rule.
At the Consumer Complaints Office, yesterday's mail was unopened. Hearings with food companies were suspended. A laboratory machine, 500 cigarettes a day to monitor tar and nicotine content of the different brands, got a break. It didn't have to smoke.
What I discovered, big corporations, Wall Street, very, very wealthy individuals, they could actually change laws and regulations to favor them and to hurt others. That process was almost invisible. It happened inside administrative agencies, inside legislatures, but the net effect of all of it was to the nation without embarrassment and without reluctance. His memo turned into a manifesto for new business-oriented think tanks, lobbying groups, trade associations, and professional organizations committed to shaping the government to better meet their needs. The vicious cycle was in full swing.
First of all, let me ask the question, how do you like to be called? How should we call you?
Your Excellency.
I was going to say, Bob.
No, call me Bob. Can we go around the table and maybe
introduce themselves?
Yeah, everybody introduce themselves.
My name's Woody Kozad. I used to be a lawyer. Now I'm a lobbyist. And as one of my fellow right-wing friends says of me, I'm like a doctor who specializes in the diseases of the very rich. And so I try to represent people who can pay my bills. So I'm one of those evil guys manipulating the rules and changing them.
Now, Woody, don't be defensive. You were just...
I'm not defensive. I'm very proud of myself.
You were doing a job, and a job has to be done.
I'm Crosby Kemper, the director of the Kansas City Public Library, and I was a Republican candidate for the state legislature in 1980, and I referred to myself then as I refer to myself now as a libertarian.
I have been a very moderate Republican and actually have helped a few Democrats. So I was happy that Crosby invited me. Thank you.
Well, you know what I would like to do, if you don't mind? Please. I would like to put party labels aside and not talk Democrats and Republicans just for a little while. Because I really want to talk about how you view politics, the economy, your values.
You know, you want to dismiss the argument about government versus the market. I'm just talking about government. And people who operate that government will do so in their own self-interest. And that's what the Constitution was designed to limit. And so the government should be limited.
I was a regulator. I was at the Federal Trade Commission. We would come up with simple rules. And then the lobbyists would attack, and they would say, you have got to give this little, make this exception, and this exception, and this exception, and then Congress would start calling and they'd say, you know, our constituents, our business constituents want this exception. It's not either market or government. It is power that is misused.
Right. And let's talk about power. Let's talk about my two clients who started a company 20 years ago and are now billionaires. They employ 9,000 people. They paid hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes. They pay high wages. It's a high-tech company, value-added, generous benefits, and yet they're held up to scorn and hatred and ridicule and contempt because they've added to income inequality, added to the concentration of wealth, added to disparity. Why are they the scapegoats? They're enacting the American dream. One of them is an immigrant.
Let's agree that there should not be any scapegoats and there's nobody evil here. But let's also agree that there's a problem.
I mean, I actually really like you, and I didn't expect to. But you vilified everything I've worked for all my life. I've had 4 very successful small businesses. I grew up poor in Springfield, Missouri. Student loans, worked my ass off, I've probably created 200 jobs. Okay, it's not a lot. I'm not the Koch brothers, but I worked my ass off. But you made me feel badly about what I've done for America. My theory is work, take care of yourself, accept responsibility for yourself, regardless of what life throws at you. Yes, we've made it. There's no question that we've made it. My husband and I pinch each other every day that we get to live in this lovely community. We're able to put his kids through college. But I think the opportunity for employment has become very complicated. Today, it's hard for people to really make ends meet. I don't feel like being 20 today is going to be as easy as it was when I was 20. It's just a different time. It's a very, very different time.
I've been working at McDonald's for 4 years. I work at the drive-thru window. I get paid $12.55 per hour. I make about $1,200 a month. $900 goes straight to rent, and I have to pay for gas, and then my phone bill. I end up with nothing. We barely make it. Gracias. Those big corporations can pay us more. They have the money. Me, as a cashier at my job, I know how much money goes in there, okay? And that is only in few hours. They're open 24/7. I sometimes have to go to the payday loan and get a loan on my paycheck in order to make it on time and don't get any late fees and try to make ends meet.
Nobody should be working full-time and not making it. Nobody in our society, the richest country, the richest nation in the history of the world, should feel as frightened and anxious and as insecure as so many people do today. The reality is that our system can reflect our values. Capitalism is what we make of it. Either the rules are going to expand opportunity and widen the circle of prosperity, or they're going to narrow opportunity.
the Secretary of Labor, Robert Reich, the Secretary of the Treasury, Robert Rubin, and the President of the United States.
I don't know whether Bill Clinton organized his economic team so that people like me would have a good chance to make our case, but we'd lose a lot of the fights. What I do know is that it was a tough slog.
To make economic policy.
I was fighting very hard for maintaining the original goals of that campaign. We wanted to do away with some of the tax subsidies the federal government was giving corporations that left average people picking up the tab. The president had pledged to end the tax break for CEO pay.
The average CEO at a major American corporation, according to a recent Senate hearing, is paid about 100 times as much as the average worker. And our government today rewards that excess with a tax break for executive pay, no matter how high it is. That's wrong. If companies want to overpay their executives and underinvest in their future, that's their business. But they shouldn't get any special treatment from Uncle Sam.
There were voices, particularly in the Treasury, who wanted a very different rule. Bob Rubin had been the CEO of a big Wall Street bank and then became the Secretary of the Treasury. He viewed the economy and he viewed America through the eyes of Wall Street. And I remember the meeting, Rubin, he said, well, why don't we make it that you can't deduct CEO pay in excess of $1 million unless it's related to corporate performance. I said, wait a minute, wait. This has nothing to do with corporate performance. It has to do with excessive CEO pay relative to the pay of average people. We're not talking about corporate performance. We're talking about widening inequality. Well, I lost that one. And because of this tax loophole, CEO pay skyrocketed in the form of stock bonuses. And this subsidy for executive pay was just one example of thousands of subsidies and tax breaks that go to corporations. The top 5 oil companies receive a combined $4 billion in tax breaks each year. Google received $632 million in government subsidies to build data centers. And the United States Department of Agriculture spends $20 billion every year on subsidies that go mostly to the largest producers. These subsidies are costing taxpayers tens of billions of dollars every year. Some estimates put it at over $100 billion. That's more than the cost to fund the entire Department of Education. We have a huge system now of corporate welfare, aid for dependent corporations, subsidies and tax breaks that have no economic justification at all, but they're there because individual corporations or specific industries have lobbied to get them. It's in the tax code, it's in appropriation bills, it's in our trade laws. Wherever you look, you find corporate welfare. I began to feel in myself some anger toward people I knew in the administration with a lot of power. Not anger at them personally, because they were nice people. I enjoyed them. But anger at not only what they represented, but the narrowness of their view. It was as if Washington was an island that was separate from the rest of the country. The voices of average citizens had disappeared, all but disappeared.
Another member of the Clinton administration announced today that he's dropping out of the game entirely. Labor Secretary Robert Reich, who's been a central player on the president's domestic policy team, is returning to Massachusetts to spend more time with his family.
My friends, we are on the way to becoming a two-tiered society, composed of a few winners
at a larger group of Americans left behind, whose anger and whose disillusionment is easily manipulated. Once unbottled, mass resentment can poison the very fabric of society, the moral integrity of a society, replacing ambition with envy, replacing tolerance with hate. Today, the targets of that rage are immigrants and welfare mothers and government officials and gays and an ill-defined counterculture. But as the middle class continues to erode, who will be the targets tomorrow?
You can see the cumulative effect of all of this over time. Wealth, creating political power, creating changes in the rules that enhance wealth. It's not sustainable. It's getting worse and worse and worse.
Big trouble for millions of American homeowners as foreclosures across the country are up a staggering 87%.
The number of Americans either behind on their mortgage payments or in foreclosure rose to record levels in the third quarter.
Those mortgages made to borrowers with poor credit histories are called subprime loans. And the explosive growth in this kind of lending in the past few years is now having a devastating impact.
We are briefly interrupting regular programming with the latest on a wild day today on Wall Street in which the stock market officially crashed.
Now, 3 of the top 5 Wall Street institutions are gone, leaving many to wonder whether Americans can trust the system to keep their money safe.
So what happened in the 2000s? Well, Wall Street went amok. I mean, completely crazy. They're gambling with people's deposits. They're gambling with the entire economy. These are not aberrations. This is not an accident. Since the Reagan administration, there's been a systematic changing of the rules of our financial system. Always billed as deregulation that would get government out of our free market.
Government, with its high taxes, excessive spending, and overregulation, had thrown a wrench in the works of our free markets.
Then in 1998, Wall Street devised new complex financial instruments to maximize their profits, known as derivatives. Despite warnings, these went unregulated.
What are you trying to protect?
We're trying to protect the money of the American public, which is at risk in these markets.
And then, in 1999, Clinton did away with the Glass-Steagall Act.
We're here today to repeal Glass-Steagall because we have learned that government is not the answer. We have learned that freedom and are the answers.
The Glass-Steagall Act was a 1930s law designed to prevent savings from being used by Wall Street speculators. But now, with no law to keep risky investment banks from merging with commercial banks or control derivatives, we ushered in 2 big-to-fail mega banks that led to the stock market crash. You know, there's this fiction that somehow you have regulation or deregulation. You don't have regulation or deregulation. The question is what kind of regulation you have. You allowed commercial and investment banks to get together, and then what happened? You have a new kind of regulation. It's called bailouts.
Good evening and even congratulations. You are now the proud owner of a massive insurance company. American taxpayers woke up this morning to learn their money makes up most of a bailout package the Federal Reserve slammed together to save a huge insurance conglomerate called AIG.
The rescue of Bear Stearns, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and AIG puts an extra $314 billion of taxpayer money at risk.
Here at home, the administration and Congress are hammering out the details for what would be the largest financial bailout in U.S. history.
This is a big package because it was a big problem.
We're not getting rid of government. Remember, that's the point. Government is still going to be involved. The question is, how is government going to be involved? Is government going to be involved in terms of keeping banks relatively small and tame? Or is government going to be involved in dealing with the consequences from homeowners and everybody else, sweeping up the mess? In other words, it's not government versus no government. It's what are the government rules going to be?
I received my diagnosis in January of this year. After receiving an infection abroad, I came home and was treated for that, and while in the hospital, they discovered that I had cancer. I have a couple of different medications for nausea. There's 2 specific ones that I take on days 2 and 3 after chemo. I get a steroid when I'm in the hospital to get me through the treatment, an antibiotic, and another that helps me sleep because I get kind of a weird vertigo during a certain point of my treatment cycle. Even in the insurance provider that I have, I was informed that they no longer cover chemo drugs fully. And so we were told by a medical social worker that we could potentially receive a bill for thousands of dollars. With the 4 drugs that I take for chemotherapy, the total comes out to about $3,000 a month per treatment. So for me, that's about 3 months of income just for one round of treatment. What is the alternative to receiving your chemotherapy drugs? There isn't one. So whatever the cost is, you have to pay it.
You and I and everybody else in this country pays more for pharmaceuticals than any citizens of any advanced nation. Why is it that we pay so much? And it has to do with the way in which pharmaceutical companies have got laws and rules that protect them. And that gives them huge market power, and that also gives them huge political power. And that political power is being exercised in all kinds of ways to tilt the market in their direction. In June of 2003, the Medicare Modernization Act came up for a vote in the House.
This will be a 15-minute vote.
It was a bill that was ostensibly intended to help seniors pay for prescription drugs. But it would also bar the government from interfering with negotiations between manufacturers and pharmacies and prescription drug plan sponsors. In other words, it would prevent the government, with its huge purchasing power, from negotiating cheaper prices for drugs. So as new drugs hit the market, patients would have no choice but to pay the costs set by the drug companies. The bill was over 1,000 pages, and it was rushed to a vote in the House at 3 a.m. the next morning.
We had leaders going around and gathering around individuals, trying to twist their arms to get them to change their votes. I think a lot of the shenanigans that were going on that night, they didn't want on national television in prime time.
On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 215. The conference report is agreed to. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
This is a piece of legislation that's hailed as a move toward a free market. But it's actually a government regulation that benefits only a few at the top. Similar manipulations of the rules of our economy are happening across our major industries. Americans pay more for internet service than the citizens of any other industrialized nation and have some of the slowest speeds because cable companies have enough political power to stifle competition. We're paying more for airline tickets because airlines have merged into just 4 major carriers that barely have to compete with each other. We pay more for health insurance as health insurers consolidate. So in every way, you see, they're using their political power, and that means you and I and every other American are paying more. How do these industries manage to get rules that benefit them? It's no mystery. Campaign contributions buy access to government officials. Well-funded public relations firms, think tanks, and research institutes produce reports to promote those views and sometimes even draft the laws they want passed. Platoons of lawyers argue on their behalf in courts and regulatory proceedings in Washington. And finally, there's the revolving door. In the 1970s, about 3% of outgoing members of Congress became lobbyists. In recent years, 42% of retiring representatives and half of all retiring senators have turned to lobbying. Lobbying has been going on since America's founding. What has changed is the magnitude of corporate lobbying versus any other interests. It's gone from a cottage industry to an influence industrial complex. Today, corporate interests spend $34 for every $1 spent by unions and all public interest groups combined. In 2016, they spent a total of $3.15 billion on lobbying. That's the equivalent of $5.9 million per member of Congress.
I'm kind of independent. At times, I see both parties doing some stuff that I don't think is what they were elected to do. They don't care about what the promises they made to the people. They care about the promises they made to their backers that give them the money. And most of us out here, I don't contribute much to political deals, you know, because I'll vote for you. And if I vote for you, that's all I should have to do. I don't have to buy your loyalty to me. Their money is their voice. Why, excuse me, where did I miss that? Money is used to purchase something, not as a voice. You know, so what are they purchasing? They're purchasing the influence of politicians.
Do you feel that you are truly represented in Washington? Do you feel that this country is headed in the right direction? No one does. That's why I'm running for Congress. My name is Dave Bratt, and I'm a lifelong Republican and conservative. And I'm ready to take economics and ethics to Washington.
Congressman.
Hey, Bob.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, seriously. And I know you're in the middle of a campaign, and this is an imposition.
No, it's not. Pleasure to meet you.
But it's great to meet you, too. I have a lot to talk to you about.
Great.
The Conservative Review has given you an award for being one of the 2 most conservative Republicans out of 247 Republicans in Congress. You use the term crony capitalism. What did you mean by crony capitalism?
The big folks get together, no matter what industry, protect their turf at the expense of the small guy. The government's job is to make sure that doesn't happen. Instead, the government's job has turned into, they make that happen. I mean, I'm not against business, right? But I am against this crony business that takes advantage of the taxpayer. I do think it's coming. People, the intuition right now is clear. Something's wrong. All over the country, right, left, everybody. Something's way off.
The old assumption has been the division is Democrat versus Republican.
That's
but what we're beginning to see is that it's actually anti-establishment versus establishment. It's people who don't want the big money and the crony capitalism versus the crony capitalists. You know, Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals there's going to be disagreement on a lot of stuff. But if you could come together on these fundamentals.
It's fine with me. You're at a deeper level, right? You've been teaching economics and all that for 30 years. I used to use your book.
You used to use my book.
I used to use it.
Can we just make, can you?
And I have a book out too.
Can we get that again?
Mine.
Congressman, what do you think of the title?
Yeah, I know. It surprised me a little bit coming for you, but in a pleasant way. I think you and I are united on we can do this in the right way, ethics and capitalism together, and we'll save the country.
Congressman, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everything fundamentally comes down to American democracy. Is it working for most people? Or is it working for a very small number? Researchers at Princeton and Northwestern University wanted to find out how much political power ordinary citizens have. They examined a 20-year period from 1982 to 2002. They first discovered that if large corporations and wealthy individuals